This is episode 1000. Yes, lots of numbers, way more than I can count. Thankfully, I have a computer for this. But, more serious note, I would like to thank you all. Thank you for sticking around for this long. Thank you for letting me do this for you. And thank you for enjoying the last 1000 episodes of Tales from Outer Space. Hopefully, this is just the warm-up, and there are many more to come. Some cheeky, some serious, some tear-jerking, but always me rambling on, reading out loud for your enjoyment. Thank you again. I just want to give a quick thanks to the Tier 5 channel members and patrons. Bob the Dragon, Datamagnet, Sergeant Puma, Cat Crab Lobster, and Duck Machine. Thank you very much for the support. It is much appreciated. The Wish, written by arclightmagus. For the past lunar cycle, we had peace, something a great coalition of our stars had never before seen. There were many voices as to what made it possible, but none spoke the true reason. The Terrans. They were the real reason. In every conflict that they had entered, the fighting had died almost immediately. Not because the Terrans were great diplomats, nor were they bulwarks. No, the Terrans were nightmares given form. Conflicts died because the fighters died or fled when faced with these nightmarish beings. They waded into conflict as though they were born in it. Dark rumors even spoke of Terrans taking trophies from their fallen enemies. Even darker rumors suggested that if Terrans were to fight one another, they would befall or witness a great cataclysm. But for the lunar cycle, the Terrans have slept, seemingly content to be the nightmares of the coalition, beings with whom abyssal deals are struck at terrible costs. The coalition dared not challenge them. These monstrous beings were protected by the great machines, and the wrath of even one Terran would be terrible. And then the Druati came. We tried to welcome them as the unified coalition should always greet a new species to the stars. But the Druati cared not. To them, they were the rightful rulers of all species, and we were to cede the stars to them. Such a demand was met with diplomacy. We tried to bargain with them. After all, the stars are so vast in quantity, and the worlds replete with resources, that only fools would claim dominion over all, especially over worlds that could not be inhabited. But the Druati cared not. All belonged to them, and in the lunar cycle since the Terrans had gone to sleep, we no longer had the armies nor the vessels to oppose the Druati. Their vessels came primed for war, ignoring our calls for diplomacy, intent on only driving us to what few worlds they seemed willing to designate for us. And even then, it appeared that the Druati would permit none but themselves to be amongst the stars. Some of the coalition suggested that the Druati meant only to subjugate us. In doing this, that perhaps we might surrender and serve under the Druati. Such a suggestion was entirely distasteful. But, in the moment, we didn't seem to have much greater options. None dared suggest making a bargain with the Terrans. Perhaps we had forgotten about them. Perhaps we were too afraid of what they represented. But it didn't matter. The coalition issued its surrender. The Druati refused it. They cursed our surrender and said that it spoke of it being proof that we did not deserve to live amongst the stars. And with that, the onslaught of the Druati against 100 worlds began. We had no great fortresses, nor great caches of weapons. But what we had permitted us to hold portions of our worlds and keep our peoples safe. For a time, the Druati continued and continued. They ravaged the lands and poisoned the skies. They pressed every advantage and seemed to gladly spend loits of life fluid for a single death amongst us. I myself was in one such besieged world. Perhaps the reason we didn't hear the call was that we had forgotten to listen. Perhaps the reason we didn't reach out for strength from the coalition was that we believed that there was no reason to try except to wear out the Druati. It was not until the fantastical vessel appeared in the sky over our hastily built and ready-to-fall fortress city that we remembered. And for as much as the vessel seemed tiny, hanging over our city in defiance of gravity, like a watcher, came to see us fall, the almost nightmarish appearance seemed a symbol of hope. The Druati seemed to notice this vessel only once it began a vigil over our city. We dared not count the streams of munitions or weapons launched against it. Only one species had vessels that were that nightmarish. Only one species were that bold. Only one species had vessels capable of standing that level of onslaught. To say our life fluid's warmth was stolen away by the mere realization of the vessel's presence was an understatement. The nightmarish myths had awoken. None of the young ones knew of them except as myth, a dark tale mentioned in the dim light and coated with life fluids. But the old ones of us knew that craft of their vessels. It appeared the Druati didn't know what to make of it. But the Druati cared not, and though I did not know it, similar vessels hung over the fortress cities of 100 besieged worlds of the Coalition, and in every case, the Druati launched as many weapons as they dared against the vessels, which hung unmarked in the skies, refusing to be brought down or even acknowledged their attacks. The Druati even began waking up some space-faring vessels to move against these strange new, to them, vessels that defied them. But the Terran vessel which hung in our sky hung in the sky, waiting for something. I knew not what they sought, or if they were simply present to bear witness to the Coalition's destruction. After a time, the Druati returned the reins back to destroying us. We, at least, were a good sport in their minds, not nightmarish vessels which did not fight back and seemed to lack even the interest in showing their first specks of damage. As the Druati assault was renewed and our walls on the verge of collapse, I looked up at the Terran vessel and mumbled a wish that the Terrans would save us, regardless of their price. The Terrans at least were likely to destroy us in the way that the Druati had promised to. The wish seemed to have no sooner left my speech than two vessels detached themselves from the craft that still hung in the sky and descended. One moved to land directly next to our wall inside our fortress. The other landed just outside of it. I watched with more intent at the one which landed within. It seemed dangerous to even look at it, but it was the way of the Terrans. That much we knew. When the doors of the vessel opened and the figures from within moved out, we gasped. These beings did not appear to be the fiendish dangers that our more modern fantasies had made the Terrans to be. But there was no denying the danger which radiated off each Terran. They moved with purpose, and while they acknowledged our presence, they seemed to ignore us otherwise. As though we were interesting, but unimportant. Standing in the presence of one along the wall, I felt buoyed by a bit of hope. But I did not trust it. I wanted to take back my wish already. To stand this close to a Terran was not something that I would have wished. And it had been so long that I'd truly forgotten how much of what was said about the Terrans was real. I saw a bit of writing that marked the back of each Terran who stood upon the wall with us. And in the presence of Terrans, the wall seemed to have become more fortified and stronger than any of us could have dreamed up. Perhaps it was simply the presence of the Terrans, but it didn't seem to matter. Carefully, I tried to read the writing, hesitant that I might offend the Terrans. Resist and bite. It seemed a strange few words, but it must be powerful to these Terrans, or else they would not adorn themselves thusly. I realized then that the sounds of the Druati assault had faded, and I looked behind the walls. There I could see a group of Terrans who appeared to be even more fearsome. They were clearly clad in fearsome armor, and while each bore a weapon, those weapons were simply attached to their sides. The Terrans in the space beyond the wall simply formed a broad line and began to walk towards the Druati, a few of whom began to move up to the forward towards the Terrans. I knew it was like the beings that none of the Druati had ever seen before today, and I doubted any of them would realize that as a mistake. For reasons I could not fathom, the Druati threw themselves at the Terrans outside the wall. There were only a few of them, and the Druati were in numbers beyond counting. In those first few moments that I bore witness to, I will admit to having seen greater horrors than even the more terrifying nightmare. Druati seemed to dissolve when they met a Terran, their bodies falling to the ground and their life fluids spilling out. After those first few moments, the Druati seemed to notice and paused, and it was in that moment that I heard the Terrans from beyond the wall call out as one, "Rup and tear!" Terran Expeditionary Reaction Force, Awakening Protocol number 823-1. Coalition Species Aid Request logged. Infestation of Class 5 Devourer species. Use of force authorized with extreme prejudice. End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you do, please consider supporting the author, even by popping over and leaving a thumbs up or a nice comment, just to show your appreciation for the story. However, if you wish to support this channel, there are links down below which will help immensely. I will see you all in the next one, and until then, I hope that you have a fantastic day. Cheers.